Hello, welcome to Cubs PS Plus, a Northside numbers game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. Cubs PS Plus is now part of Bleacher Bunch Network, joining great shows like The Son Ranto Show and Cup of Cubby Blue. The Bleacher Bunch Network is available wherever you find your podcasts, and Cubs PS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/CubsPSPlus, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits starting as low as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at Cubs PS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you could share an episode with a friend. Welcome into episode 65, the Connor Menez episode of this podcast. Connor threw one scoreless inning for the Cubs in 2022. So this week, Jed did a thing. He signed a free agent. Shōta Imanaga is now a Cub. The lefty will be part of the Cubs rotation, and we're heading into CubsCon, so something happened right on time. This week, let's talk about Shōta Imanaga. Let's talk about the needs the Cubs still have remaining, where they sit with regard to the competitive balance tax. And it's CubsCon weekend. Let's go. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. After weeks and weeks and weeks of waiting, Jed did something. And he did a good thing. I'm sure you've all heard the news by now, but the Cubs signed Shōta Imanaga, pitcher out of Japan, a lefty, to a 4-year deal. We'll talk about the contract in a minute. It's an interesting one, but yeah, Jed made a move, and I think the Cubs got better. One thing I've heard a lot this week is comparison to Marcus Stroman. I don't know how good Shōta Imanaga will be. I think he's likely to be a solid number 3 starter with number 2 starter potential. I don't know that he's going to be as good as Marcus Stroman, certainly not as good as Marcus Stroman was in the first half of last year. But remember, when we talk about replacing players, the Cubs are trying to improve on what they did in 2023. And so to add another starting pitcher, replacing Marcus Stroman helps, and you want to get better. But we have to remember what Marcus Stroman actually contributed last year. So he was absolutely lights out through the middle of June. I mean, he was looking like starter of the All-Star game, Cy Young favorite kind of performance. I mean, he was fantastic. Then he got the blister in London and struggled a little bit. I think he was pitching hurt for a while, really had just an awful month, and then really missed most of the last 2 months of the season. So when you look at replacing Marcus Stroman, you don't need to replace Marcus Stroman necessarily with Cy Young level performance. You need to replace him with somebody who's going to be good, consistent, hopefully make 32 starts, and win some games for you. In that sense, I think the Cubs made a really good move here. So now I would say the rotation, we can all quibble on order, but the rotation at the moment looks like Justin Steele at the top, probably Jameson Taillon 2, Shōta Imanaga 3, Kyle Hendricks 4, and that leaves a 5th spot open for a battle for some of the younger guys. You know, Jordan Wicks might appear to have the inside track. Maybe Hayden Wesneski comes back this year. I'm still not entirely sure he's done as a starter. Maybe he has a hot spring, wins that spot. Javier Assad is in the mix. Ben Brown, who has not made his debut yet. You know, eventually later this season, I think we'll see Cade Horton. So I think where they are right now leaves some space for the young kids to come up. We'll talk more about that later too, but let's dive into Shōta. So Shōta Imanaga has an elite level fastball. You know, I've seen him referred to as a soft tossing lefty. That's not really all that accurate. I mean, he doesn't throw super hard. He's more in the 91 to 94 range. But his fastball has elite spin, and he gets 20 inches of induced vertical break. And for those of you who aren't familiar, induced vertical break is basically no baseballs actually rise. You know, your pitchers are throwing the ball downhill, gravity's pulling the ball down. But if you get enough backspin on the ball, it helps the ball keep elevation, and to the hitter's eye, it looks like it's rising. It's not really rising. It's just not dropping as fast as the hitter's eye expects. And that 20 inches of induced vertical break is elite. And what that does is it keeps it up in the zone. Hitters are often under it. It also means that it basically plays like a faster fastball. So while he's throwing 92, 93, 94, it's playing more like 96, 97. So for a lefty who doesn't throw super hard, that pitch is pretty elite, and he gets a lot of whiff on it, so a lot of swing and miss. He throws that pitch, or at least in NPB, he threw that pitch about 54% of the time. His first secondary pitch, that's a weird way to say it, is his sweeper slider, and he threw that about 16% of the time. And when you look at Stuff Plus is a measure of how good that pitch is for that pitcher, and it's because it's a plus, it's like WRC plus or OPS plus. It's based on 100 is average. So his Stuff Plus numbers in NPB, that fastball rated as a 124 Stuff Plus, so it's 24% better than the average fastball. His sweeper slider is also excellent. It's a 130 Stuff Plus. And so those two play off each other really well, and I think that's going to translate. His third pitch is a split. He threw the split 12% of the time. It has a 99 Stuff Plus. So it's a pretty average pitch, but when you play it off the top level fastball and sweeper, it's a good mix. I think what's going to happen, I think the Cubs are certainly going to use that fastball and that sweeper. I mean, those are very good pitches that should translate very well to Major League Baseball. I think they're going to want to increase use of another pitch, especially to help get righties out. And so we'll see. He throws three other pitches. He's got a cutter, a curveball, and a sinker that he all threw less than 10% of the time in NPB. My guess is the Cubs are going to pick one of those pitches, probably the cutter, and see if they can, help develop that pitch, make it a little bit stronger, and then get him to use it maybe more like, 12 to 15% of the time. So he really has a 4-pitch mix. He can go to the curve or the sinker every once in a while as needed. But what you get is, he's going to have a lot of fastballs at the top of the zone. So that's going to play up. He'll play the sweeper down. He'll use the cutter, hopefully, as cutter in the split to, again, change the batter's eye level. He has a reputation for being a fly ball pitcher. And part of that is that fastball. The fastball plays up. Guys are underneath it. And his numbers make him look home run prone. But when you look at the park he played in Japan, his home park was like 308 feet down the lines. So that's a bandbox of a ballpark. He's going to give up some home runs, no doubt. I mean, never mind, every pitcher does. But he will be a little bit more of a fly ball pitcher, which is a little bit of a deviation from what the Cubs often put out there, ground ball pitchers with that great infield. I don't think Shōta's going to have a massive home run problem. I don't think Wrigley plays that small most of the time. He used to have the reputation for either extreme, wind blowing in, hard to get anything out, or wind blowing out and everybody's hitting bombs. I think some of the video boards they've put up have cut that down in recent years, and I think the park plays a little bit more neutral. I'm excited. I think that's going to add some good swing and miss to the Cubs staff and be a bit of a change of pace, and it's a third lefty, potentially. When you look at the rotation, if Wicks takes that fifth spot, you probably got Justin Steele is likely the number one. He's lefty. And then Shōta Imanaga is lefty and Jordan Wicks is lefty. And so that's going to be a nice little trio. You've got, Drew Smiley's probably coming out of the bullpen, but he can spot start as needed. So, there's a lot to like there. And I think what's even more to like is the contract. There was talk during the offseason that maybe he was looking at $100 million deal, something like, 5-100, 5-110. In line with what teams are paying for pitching today, that would have seemed to be right on market. Maybe a touch above, but I know I've seen too many complaints about him being 30. I know he hasn't pitched in the big leagues yet, so there will be an adjustment period, but, Kodai Senga worked out okay. And Japanese pitchers in recent years have translated over pretty well. But at 30, that's not some old pitcher. When you look around the league, most guys, when they hit free agency for the first time for their, if they're good enough to get a big contract, they're between like 29 and 32, occasionally 28. Kind of depends on when they come in. So, kind of a typical path would be if a player gets drafted out of high school, you're going to spend 3, 4, 5 years in the minor leagues fighting through low A, high A, double A, whatever, unless you're, a real top prospect and flying through the system. So you're going to make your debut at 23, 24. get in the rotation, pitch a year or two. Teams have 6 years of control over guys. So, to hit free agency, especially as a starting pitcher before age 28, 29, 30, you have to be up and starting early. Those are guys who are top level prospects who are coming up at, 2021, like Kerry Wood did it back in the day. And, Mark Pryor came up really young for a college pitcher, came up fast, but 30 is a pretty typical free agent age. And when you look at the way pitchers pitch in Japan, they're typically on a 6-man rotation and they have a shorter season. So Shōta's going to have a little bit less mileage on that arm than a 30-year-old pitcher who's been starting in the States for 5 or 6 years. So I'm not that worried about his age, but certainly when you look at the contract. So the contract is a little bit unusual, but I'll talk through why I don't think that even matters. The Cubs signed him to a 4-year, $53 million deal, which would put the average annual value a little over $13 million per year for purpose of the competitive balance tax. What makes that deal unique is after year 2, the Cubs have the opportunity. They have a club option on a 5th year, which would take the contract up to 5 years, $80 million. And after year 2, the Cubs have that choice. If the Cubs decide to take that option, then it becomes a 5-year, $80 million contract with no opt-outs for Shōta. He does not have a no-trade clause, and that will be the deal. If the Cubs do not pick up that 5th year option after year 2, Shōta has the opportunity to opt for free agency, so he's an opt-out of his contract. If neither party takes the option, if the Cubs don't extend to the 5th year and Shōta does not opt for free agency, then it remains a 4-year contract for $53 million. After year 3, they go through that process again. So the Cubs have another shot to add the 5th year. And if the Cubs don't add the 5th year, then Shōta can again opt out for free agency. Again, if nobody does it, then it's a 4-year contract. He'll play year 4, finish out the deal at 4 years, $53 million, and then proceed on to whatever comes next. It makes it interesting because I think if, that price is nothing. Even if the Cubs signed him today to 5 years, $80 million, that's $16 million a year average annual value. That's what they're paying Jameson Taillon. That's pretty much standard rates right now for a 3 and probably even some number 4 starting pitchers. Like, starting pitching is getting more and more expensive. So that is not an unreasonable deal at all. So if Shōta shows, frankly, anything probably in the first 2 years, the Cubs are almost certainly going to pick up that 5th year. And if he comes over and really struggles, has 2 bad seasons, or he's injury plagued and, can't stay on the mound or something like that, to where the Cubs wouldn't want to pick up that 5th year, he's probably not in a position to opt out for free agency anyway. So on the whole, I think basically he's either going to come over and be a good pitcher, which I think he will, and the Cubs will almost undoubtedly pick up that 5th year option. Or if he struggles and is a free agent miss, then it'll be the 4 years and the Cubs will move him on. But that money, $13, $14, $15, $16 million per year, that's not money that's going to be an albatross. That's not going to keep the Cubs from spending in other places. So I love this deal. I think it's an absolute steal from Jed. I think it's a sign that, we know Jed is methodical. We know Jed is looking for value. He talks about intelligent spending, and this is a really strong value play. He's a really good pitcher in Japan who I think can translate to certainly being a good pitcher here, potentially a very good pitcher here. And the Cubs got him on a steal. There's a report out there. I don't know for sure. I know Boston was interested. There was a report out there that some team had offered him twice as much money, but he really wanted to be a Cub. And so that's how it worked out. And I don't know, never saw details on that other offer. It might not even be true, but that could mean he turned down a much higher AAV, or maybe more in terms of total dollars, maybe a little higher AAV, but more years. But in any case, it seems like Shōta Imanaga wanted to be a Cub, and the Cubs liked him a lot. We heard talk about him being tied to the Cubs even last summer, and apparently he's been in Chicago since Christmas, so he must like the cold, and it's coming this weekend. But the timing on this is great. I mean, the huge blizzard rolling in this weekend, so we'll see what that does to crowds. But Jed got his signing before CubsCon. I'm going to be making my first trip out to CubsCon, so I'm really looking forward to it. Shōta passed his physical. The contract is official, and he'll be introduced Friday, I believe, at the Cubs convention. So it'll be fun. I'll be there, and very interested to see where this goes, and where the Cubs go next. I still think Cody Bellinger is the next big target. And when you look at what they need and what they have to spend, before they signed Imanaga, the Cubs were about $51 million under the first threshold of the competitive balance tax. I don't know exactly yet what Shota's tax hit's going to be. I've never seen a team have a club option that didn't also come with a buyout if they don't exercise it. So I have to assume that there's probably a buyout tied to that fifth year, but I haven't seen it. It's not up on Spot Track. I've not seen it reported anywhere. I would guess, it's not going to be a massive given the contract he has, but it could be $5 million, potentially 10, probably not 10. That's pretty high. Probably more like five range. But for average annual value purposes for the competitive balance tax, the buyout gets added to the total value of the contract. So, if it's a $5 million buyout, the 4 years, $53 million becomes a 4-year, $58 million guarantee. And then you'd do the math on that, and that would be the average annual value. But I expect that Imanaga's AAV for CBT purposes is going to come in between $14 and $16 million. So let's call it $15 million. So the Cubs had $51 million to spend before that deal. Take away about 15-ish, and now you're at like $35, $36 million left before the Cubs even hit the first threshold of the tax. And the Cubs still have needs. So I think Cody Bellinger is the next obvious need. The Cubs need a big lefty bat. He's even coming into free agency, he was the second best bat available on the market behind Shohei Ohtani. And so I think he makes so much sense. I think he really liked being in Chicago last year. The Cubs liked having him around. I know they got Scott Boras as an agent, which I talked about last week, but the Cubs can deal with Scott Boras. It has to play out. It's going to take its time. I would not be at all surprised if Cody is signed soon. I wouldn't even be shocked if he's signed before Cubs convention, although here it is Thursday morning and I'm recording and no announcement yet, so that might be pushing it. After that, I think the Cubs need another bat, and I think they need a power bat. One thing we talked about all year, the Cubs needed more power. And one of the best guys on the market is Rhys Hoskins. He missed all of last year after getting an ACL repair. I think he hurt it last spring training, but he missed the entire 2023 season. So there is some injury risk with him coming back, but guys have had good track records coming back from ACL, and he's not a guy who's reliant on speed or play a premium defensive position like center field. So, Kyle Schwarber had that surgery, and he was younger than Rhys is now, but he had the surgery and came back fine. And I'm pretty confident that Rhys Hoskins is going to come back and continue to be a really good hitter. He's been a good hitter, a lot of power, and I think makes a ton of sense. Some people have said he makes almost as much sense as any player to any team this offseason. I don't think he's going to be expensive. I don't know what he wants. There are rumors out there that the Cubs have talked with Hoskins and Boras about a 1-year deal, multiple year deals. I'd be fine to sign him for 1 year, for 3 years, whatever it is he's looking for. In some cases, like Cody Bellinger last year, explicitly wanted a 1-year contract. Give me a 1-year contract. I'll go prove that I can play and then hit free agency. Rhys might want that. Or he might want to take he's in his 30s, so he might want to take a 3-4 year deal if that's available. I'd be good either way. I love the Bellinger and Hoskins pairing because the Cubs have holes, and I think the Cubs' most obvious holes are third base, center field, first base, and then what they do with DH. I would love to see Christopher Morel get run at third base. That's why I'm not a huge proponent of the Cubs signing Matt Chapman. I'm certainly not a proponent of signing Matt Chapman for 5 years. I think he's just not good enough to warrant locking up the position that long. The Cubs have Christopher Morel, who could potentially play third base this year. They have guys coming up through the system in the infield that may well push for time very soon. So if they get Matt Chapman, I don't hate Matt Chapman as a player. He's a really good defensive third baseman. And as a hitter, he profiles about like Dansby Swanson. He's going to be a decent hitter, strike out a little bit, have some pop, maybe 20, 25 home runs. Maybe in a peak year, maybe he gets up to 30. I mean, he could make this team better in 2023. So if the Cubs sign him with one of those Jed Magic deals where they get him to sign for 2 or 3 years, then I'm good with Matt Chapman. I still don't like his offensive profile as much as Rhys Hoskins, and I think Rhys is a better fit for what this lineup needs. But I could live with Matt Chapman for a couple years. He's not good enough to fill up an infield position for the next 5, though. I mean, the Cubs have Matt Shaw rising fast, James Triantos, and there may be some question about whether those guys play third base, Christopher Morel too. But the Cubs are going to have options. First of all, I'm a big believer if you can play short, you can play third. Nico Horner could also play in the infield position. So if you've got a guy who's pushing hard enough for playing time and you got to make something work, like the Cubs have a ton of options. Dansby could move to third and Nico to second. Nico could move to short and Nico could move to third. Maybe Matt Shaw or James Triantos plays third. So many options, but we're not talking about Manny Machado or Nolan Arenado here. Like, Matt Chapman's good, but he's not that good. If he was on that level, forget about the prospects. Just sign the guy and we'll worry about the prospects later. But I don't think Matt Chapman fits quite as well as some of those guys. So I would prefer to see Hoskins, Bellinger and Hoskins as the 2 big bat ads. Another option might be JD Martinez. He's getting older. He's probably looking at primarily DH, but he can still hit. Brandon Belt's another one. There are some bench guys that I think could make a lot of sense in a part-time role, coming off the bench kind of bat. But I really like the Bellinger-Hoskins pairing because of where the Cubs have holes. So if the Cubs sign those 2 guys, it gives Morel a chance to get extended run at third base. And I'm not talking like a month. Like, I think he should get a good solid half a season unless he is an absolute train wreck defensively at third base. I think Christopher Morel is going to hit. He's going to hit for power. I think the Cubs want to have him in the lineup all the time. And he's athletic enough, has a really strong arm, and there's really no reason to just force him into DH already. I really want to see him get some run at third base. And then center field and first base are 2 positions where the Cubs may have players ready now. There'll be debate about whether Pete Crow Armstrong can win the center field job out of spring training, or maybe Alexander Canario can win that job out of spring training until PCA is ready. They also have Matt Mervis, who continues to just mash baseballs in AAA and has not really gotten a good long run at first base for the Cubs. So I could see a real hedge, like go to spring training, let Canario, Crow Armstrong, and Mervis compete for jobs, and whoever tears it up, Bellinger can play in either slot. Rhys Hoskins can play first base or he can DH. So there are just a bunch of options there. And, if Mervis isn't ready and Pete Crow Armstrong and Canario are, gives you flexibility. You can put somebody at DH. You can put PCA in center. Bellinger could play first. Rhys Hoskins could play first. I think it just gives you the Cubs a lot of hedges where those kids are. But actual hedges, not like last year when, ideally the Cubs would have signed either Hosmer or Mancini as a hedge in case Mervis was not ready. Instead, they signed them both, which blocked Mervis. And then Mervis came up, got a shot, got sent down, and then Bellinger got hurt and just had to play first base. So, never really came back. I think with one guy there who has some flexibility, I think it's good to have that option. Mervis doesn't necessarily have to be up all season unless his hitting warrants it. But the idea that, he's just going to spend another year in AAA, we talked about this a little bit last week, that's just wasted cycles. At some point, his status as a prospect was already a little bit lower to start with anyway, because he doesn't play a premium position. He might project as a DH in the majors. But the dude hits for power, and so let's take advantage of it. Let's see if he can play in the major leagues or trade him. So there are options there. I think the next need, the Cubs need a couple relief pitchers. I know there's a lot of talk about Josh Hader, and hey, I'm never going to say no to Josh Hader if the Cubs actually make that deal. But I think Hader's going to get something probably close to what Edwin Diaz got last year with the Mets. He got like five years, $100 million, so something like in the 20-ish range per year. It's a lot for a closer. The Cubs don't have that as an explicit need at this point. They've got Edbert Alzolay, who pitched well in the closer role last year. Certainly, if they get Hader would take that spot over. That's fine. But what the Cubs really need is just more depth. So right now the Cubs have Alzolay. They've got Julian Merriweather, Mark Leiter Jr., assuming he's got a split back. Jose Cuas, Daniel Palencia, Luke Little. Yeah, they've got options in the bullpen, but they need to get about 2 more good, solid arms, to replace Michael Fulmer and just make that bullpen deeper. I'd like to see guys like Robert Stevenson, who's pitched for the Rays, Suter from the Rockies, left-hander. He's good. There are a bunch of other guys out there that would be options. The Cubs just need a couple more guys who can take some of those leverage innings and take some of the pressure off so that you're not relying on, 3-4 guys the entire year to get all the key outs. After that, it's really depth plays. Jed can look around. Maybe he makes a trade. Maybe it's still possible they trade for Shane Bieber. I've heard rumors off and on about Jesus Luzardo from the Marlins. Maybe dealing for Randy Arozarena from, Tampa. I'm not sure all those guys fit, but, I think Jed should continue to look and see where a trade might make sense. One guy who's really interesting to me, wouldn't really help at all for this year, is Brandon Woodruff. So he got hurt last year with the Brewers. He's been a top starting pitcher for them for a while. And he's going to miss probably all of 2024, certainly most of it. I would love to see the Cubs sign him on a 2-year deal, pretty cheap, let him rehab and get back to health this year. And then they'd have him for the rotation in 2025. I think he could be a really, really strong pickup with not a lot of risk. I mean, the Cubs have done that in the past. They did that with Drew Smyly back in I think they picked him up in 2018. We're hoping to have him in 2019, but they wound up trading him away. They've done that with some other guys. They did that with Ryan Dempster back in the day. Got him coming off Tommy John, and then he wound up pitching for them for years. So I think you can look around for moves like that, maybe another low-level starting pitcher. When you look at starting pitcher, I talk about this a lot. You need to have, ideally, like 9 or 10 guys who you could trust to start a few games for you. Obviously, the Cubs aren't going to run a 10-man rotation. But you want to have that depth, and we've seen it. Steele missed a couple starts last year. Stroman missed a couple months. Drew Smyly was in and out of the rotation. Kyle Hendricks missed the first month. And, with the guys they have right now, Kyle Hendricks is not getting any younger. I mean, I have no reason to think he's not going to have a fine season this year. But the idea that, he's locked in and is going to make 32 starts, it's very much in doubt. The Cubs right now would have, as we walked through it before, Steele, Tyone, Imanaga, Hendricks, and then, Wicks, Brown, Assad, Wisniewski. Drew Smyly could potentially start games as needed. Drew Smyly can't be a full-time starting pitcher. He really can't effectively go past 100 innings, but he can still be very valuable as a swingman, long guy out of the bullpen, make a spot start if a guy's going to miss a start. That's fine. I think Cade Horton probably makes his debut in 2024, assuming he stays healthy and gets off to a good start in the minor leagues. I mean, that's 10 guys right there. And there are some other guys in the Cubs system that, could potentially make a leap this year. Still wouldn't be surprised if they added one more piece. Maybe they want Wisniewski to be in the back end of that bullpen. Maybe certainly it would be ideal to not have Drew Smyly start games. They may want Assad in the bullpen, but you can't have enough pitching. So I think that's going to be something else to look for. But, hey, I'm just thrilled that the Cubs did something this week. And now it's Cubs convention. And I'm really looking forward to going out there. If you're going out there, stay safe with all the nasty weather. I'm flying out Thursday and work the day job from the hotel on Friday and probably get to the hotel and not step outside again until I catch my flight back on Sunday. But, hey, if you're around, you see me, say hi. Thrilled to have you guys as listeners. And I think it's going to be a really fun weekend. So have a great time if you're going, and if you're not, tune in to Marquee. There are going to be some interesting sessions. You get to see Imanaga for the first time. Maybe they'll sign somebody else during the convention like they did Mancini last year. That could be a lot of fun. But, I'm getting really optimistic for Cubs baseball, and I think the Cubs are finally going to be really active over the next few weeks. They have moves to make. I think Jed wants to spend maybe not massive amounts. I don't know what the target is. I would be surprised if the Cubs do not go over the first threshold of the CBT. But they've still got money and runway left before they do so. So certainly more to come. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts, and share an episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/CubsPS+ to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the Cubs PS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!